My name is Olga Johannesson. I'm a communicator, producer of media projects, and I'm a moderator of this talk. Why do we talk to women? Traditionally, everything which is connected with war has been connected with men. Boys start to play the war, men go to the war, they fight in the battle. And all of this leaves women and children in this regard out of the picture, in a way, which is ultimately wrong. Women not only affected the war, but they actually bear the blow of the hardest responsibility for the elderly, for the youth, for the children, let alone for the men themselves when they come from the war. Women support, women provide, women flee, women help, women give comfort and hope, let alone that many of them actually fight in the battle. Why do we talk to women of Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, Baltics? Because as a part of democratic society, which we would like to believe Europe and Nordics are, we would like to hear to every individual. To every individual, she's supposed to be heard. Besides that, it's essentially important to learn the contexts and backgrounds from which these individuals come into the society, because it's obviously affecting the society in its own turn. We also talk to them for understanding, because they are the key code to understanding of the processes. And remember, the woman is the fifth element. We live in a world awash with information. It takes a second to fish the phone out of the pocket, and then we scroll down the news app or we read the social media and we think we understand it all. And maybe we do. Let's give it a presumption of doubt. But only through the words of a person, through the eyes of a human being, we can understand, we can relate to the story and understand the story, what it is really about. Nothing in the history of humankind has been invented more powerful than the personal story. Today we will hear 4 personal stories of women from Ukraine, Russia, and Nordics, from Denmark. And this is the proof to the most important aspect of this talk, is that there is not a person not affected by war. Of course, the scale is different. Some people lose their work, someone get economically hit, someone lose their beloved ones, have to flee, someone get bombed, shelled, killed. Of course, the effect is different. But once again, what we learned the hard way, there is not a person not affected by war. In this respect, I would like to introduce the panel and invite Oksana Didyk. Oksana is from Kharkiv. She is a former brand strategist. Now she is a refugee in Denmark. She is a former PhD student in Kharkiv University, and now she is applying to being a visiting researcher in political sciences in Copenhagen University. She is also a mother to a 1-year-old child with whom he fled to Denmark. Oksana.
Hi. Thank you very much. Thank you, Olga. Thank you.
Irina Nielsen. Irina is from Moscow. She lives in Denmark. She is a writer and translator and the former teacher of Danish language to the foreigners. Now she works in Danish public school with children of Ukrainian refugees. She also a mother of an 8-year-old son. Irina.
Thank you.
Oksana Nykytyuk from Kiev office of Ukrainian-Danish Youth House, where she was a regional program officer. In the first weeks of war, she had to flee Ukraine, leaving all her family behind, and now she lives and works with the youth in Copenhagen. Oksana.
Hello, everyone.
And Henriette Reinhold, a director of Danish Cultural Institute in St. Petersburg. In the first weeks of war, she fled Russia together with her daughters, at the same time as her husband, a Danish reporter, was left in Ukraine covering the war. Please give the warmest applause to the panel. We start the discussion, and I'm very happy to see a lot of interesting audience here. I would like to encourage you to think of the questions while you hear to the participants. We would have the usual Q&A session in the end of the discussion. Please think of the questions that you would like to ask them. It can be also done in Danish. So if you feel not comfortable asking the questions in English, please raise your hand, ask the question in Danish, and we will assist you. But we shall start. And I would like to ask a question. How did the war affect you personally? How the war changed your life, Oksana?
Well, it's difficult to say because, you know, when it concerns your private life, your private things, it's always difficult not to get too emotional. When the second phase of the war started, I mean the 24th of February, I was living a very good life. I used to have my business, my academic career. I used to have a very happy family, a very small child that was raising with that much of happiness and joy. And then I've lost everything. Now here I'm standing as a refugee, first of all, not thinking about the previous career I used to have, and of course all of the, I don't know, any kind of experience that used to be a part of my previous life. When the second phase of war started, I was in Kharkiv. I woke up at 5 a.m. and I saw explosions. I heard terrible sounds, and on the second day of war, I had to leave my house, all of my life behind. My office, my summer house with the private beach, and many other things. But it's nothing to compare with the people who have lost their lives, because I'm talking about my friends, my neighbors who are not with us anymore, and I'm talking about my father. He's on the occupied territory with no utilities, no internet, no telephone connection, just living like a slave. And we are here in the 21st century talking about equality, talking about democracy, and I think like the main reason I decided to take part in this conference was to tell that it should not be like that. I should not be judged because I'm Ukrainian. I have 2 higher educations. I speak 7 languages, and I used to have a normal life, which I really, I would like no one would be in my shoes. This is like the thing. This is like the short explanation of what was the effect of this war on me. Yeah.
Thank you, Oksana. We just move on. It's a difficult discussion, but we go through that. Irina, you're from Moscow and you live in Denmark. One would say thousands of kilometers from the war, but how can you say in which respect the war affected you and your life here?
Well, on February 24, millions of Russian citizens in Russia and worldwide woke up to a catastrophe. It was a shock. The world we knew was destroyed in one day, and for a lot of us it was clear the worst was yet to come. The week the war started, my mom was visiting me in Denmark and we were on holidays. We planned to go sightseeing on February 24th with a Danish guide, and I remember thinking this morning, like, I will be translating the excursion for my mother, and the guide will ask, "Where are you from?" And I will hesitate. Never ever have I hesitated to answer this question, but now I was ashamed and I was afraid to say I was from Russia. And it felt that it somehow was mine and my mother's fault that we let this happen. And I have lived with this feeling ever since. I'm still trying to find the answer. Did we, ordinary Russians, have a real chance to do things differently? Could we have avoided this horrible war? I don't know. Some would say that living under Putin's regime is like being married to an abuser. Nobody cares as long as he just beats you now and then behind closed doors. But as soon as he goes out and kills your neighbor's wife, then it's somehow your fault. You should have stopped him by putting him in jail. But I mean, a lot of women will agree with me on this. It is never that simple. Being a Russian now means feeling ashamed and afraid. I hate Putin for what he had done to Russia and for what he is doing to Ukraine. But I love my Russia, my home city, my mother, my friends. And I read and repost news about shelling in the Ukraine, and about suffering of the people in Kharkov and Mariupol and Bucha and other cities. I posted on Facebook, and now I'm afraid to go back to Russia because what then? Will I be punished for spreading this news? I have told the truth to my 8-year-old son about what's happening, and I'm afraid to take him to Russia because what if he starts talking about this in a public place? And now, if the European Union will deny Russians access to the Schengen countries, then I might not see my mother for years unless I choose to visit her in Russia. So I would say, how could this war not affect me when being a Russian will never be the same after February 24?
Thank you, Irina. Oksana, you arrived in Denmark in March, in the first weeks of war.
Yeah.
What was the biggest impact of war on you?
Honestly speaking, it's absolutely ongoing process already within 6 months, because of course there are things which I lost, things which I learned, and absolutely strong values which appeared in my even daily life. I did realize that the only thing which is certain is uncertainty, and living with such uncertainty, honestly speaking, it's of course very exhausting, but also you realize, okay, then the only choice I do have is to adjust to a new reality and to be flexible. Whenever, you know, there is an opportunity to share the thoughts about the war, it's like, you know, falling apart into 40 million pieces. Because when the war started, I was living in Kyiv, but before, for many years, I was living in Mykolaiv, which is under enormous attack on a daily basis. I studied in Kharkiv, which is the city now close to be gone, you know, on the like out of the earth, same as Mariupol, and before in Odessa. So my heart belongs to each of those cities. And among with that, I realized actually, and the strongest effect was, who am I? What is my identity? And who am I as a person tomorrow? And of course, responsibility for each and every step, you know, on a daily basis. Yeah, and a strong concern is also that I will be, and I have like a double responsibility, that my generation and me myself will be the ones to rebuild the country we are willing to live at. Yeah, so it's basically the main things. It's an absolute change of a mindset, because like living apartment with the only backpack on 24s, and up till now not knowing am I and is it the country I will settle, and strong in my heart I do have a will to be back, and not having, you know, access like to the things, basic things. I do think and question myself on a daily basis. Okay, am I doing it now? Do I settle now? And you know, especially being in the age already, like I'm 31, same as my country, and yesterday we had Independence Day, and it's even the most important than even the Christmas, you know, and especially this year we feel it like every Ukrainian. And before the war, I was already on the stage when I was admiring everything I have, whom I have, what I do, which secure environment I do have of people, and where am I going, what is my direction of personal self-development. And then at one point, it's just like not there anymore. So it's myself, I was taken away from me, and within those months, I was like, you know, bringing myself together.
Thank you so much. Henriette, you are a Danish woman. One can argue, what are you doing here? In which respect you can say, if you can say, that you are a woman in war?
It is a very difficult panel to be in that sense, because I don't feel that I can kind of compare to you at all, because you have been affected so much more than me personally. But it doesn't mean that you're not affected if you somehow are involved, and I think many out there less involved are also affected. Personally, for me, living in Russia, working in Russia for many years, knowing Ukraine, also have been working and visiting Ukraine also in the past, it was life-changing as well on different levels. Not just the fact that, of course, we had to leave Russia, where we had settled down as a family, well, except my husband, who was covering actually the situation in Ukraine just before the war broke out. He managed to return to St. Petersburg 2 days before then that he had to return because the war broke out. So I was there with my children in St. Petersburg, and honestly, really in shock. And I have to say, feeling a little bit ashamed as well, not even being a Russian, but having this interest, love towards Russia through this many years, and not being able to see that this would happen. I think I was equally shocked and ashamed as many Russian. Of course, I had my thoughts immediately was with Ukraine, because this is where the war is ongoing. But being in Russia at the time, of course, I also had many feelings about the Russians that I worked with and my friends there. So it's sort of a dream or a belief in the possibility of making a change or having cooperation with Russia, people to people, that sort of also shattered with the war, that suddenly it seemed impossible in many ways to have Russia as a close neighbor that we could actually engage with, learn from in both ways. So now, of course, I can say I'm not losing my identity. I haven't lost my home. Well, it was a temporary home I lost. So for me, it's definitely not the same. But it has been very emotional as well to have to realize that you couldn't foresee something like this happen.
Thank you so much. But just following on what you just said right now, still you are a woman from the Nordics, from this part. Can I just, following on what you said, ask you the question, how did the war affect it, or what is the short-term and long-term, maybe even more interesting, long-term, because we're kind of facing the short-term effect of the war right now. What is the long-term effect of the war on the Nordic society? How do you think?
Well, if we talk about Russia, I think it would be more relevant for you to talk about the relation between, of course, Ukraine and the Nordic countries. But when it comes to the relationship between the Nordic countries and Russia, suddenly we are set back decades in the way we cooperate. We have to start from zero. The belief in each other was not huge from the outset, before the war even. Of course, there were movements and groups, especially in the bigger cities of the northwest of Russia, who were interested and curious about the Nordic countries and vice versa. But now we are sort of set back decades because it's going to be very difficult to build up any sort of trust and find out how can we jointly find ways to cooperate and actually use each other. Was it all wasted is also the question. All the efforts that many people have put into this cooperation, was it worth nothing, you know? And now we have to sort of, I feel, start from the beginning. And that, I'm afraid, will take years and years to try to build up this trust and interest in cooperation in each other. So the war has definitely affected the Nordic countries in the relationship to Russia. It's the closest neighbor, big neighbor we have. We cannot ignore Russia, but how can we cooperate as it looks now? So that I don't see any solutions, but we have to start with small initiatives to try to build up some people-to-people relations, because I think on the political level it's going to take a long time. So we need to start focusing on ways of getting to learn each other and understand each other, or what is the people on the other side of the border actually thinking, and maybe we could start seeing ways that we can cooperate.
Of course, it's a long way and a lot of things have to be done. And of course, right now, all our focus and all our thoughts are on the Ukraine and with Ukraine. That's the most important thing. But still, as you said quite rightly, there's still people, and there's still people-to-people connection is important. But then maybe I would like to ask Irina a question to you. What can just maybe serve a possibility, provide a hint for a possibility, a way out, a basis for the dialogue between the nations?
Well, if you mean the dialogue on the highest level, then I have both a short and a long answer. The short one is, any dialogue with Putin is impossible, full stop. The long answer goes here. Putin is not Russia, and excluding Putin from the dialogue does not necessarily mean excluding Russia from the dialogue. Quite the opposite, actually. It is crucial that the world understands the majority of Russians do not support the war. I have been in contact with sociologists in Russia, and they all agree on one thing. Sociology is only possible in a democratic state. In Russia, there is no democracy, and hence no trustworthy sociology. When asked about their opinion on the war, Russians deny to answer, or they answer what they think they are supposed to answer in order to not get in trouble. So you can't rely on this sociology. And moreover, the majority of Russians don't actually know what is happening in Ukraine, because the media is owned by the government and they won't let the people know what is happening. But even under those circumstances, there are a lot of Russians who are fleeing the country in order not to pay taxes and contribute to the war. A lot of cultural figures and scientists in Russia have signed anti-war letters and either fled the country or have to face trial. The independent media in Russia are still operating, although they only can be accessed through using VPN and they exist on donations. The NGOs are still working, although they all have been labeled as foreign agents. And these are the voices that should be heard. And now it is most important because most international journalists can't operate inside Russia. And it's crucial that the voices from the inside of Russia are heard. Without their insight, it can easily seem that the more restrictions you introduce to the Russian population, the sooner they rise against the Putin's regime, and the war will be over. But it doesn't work like that. The way out is never as simple as this. And in my opinion, it can only be found in collaboration with the Russian independent media, NGOs, and cultural figures. If your question is more about whether a dialogue between common Russians and Ukrainians is possible, I would hope it is. I myself was afraid of talking to my Ukrainian friends when the war started. What could I say to them? How could I look them in the eye? But then I found the courage to say, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry that the Ukrainian nation has to go through this nightmare because of what my country is doing. And me and my friends, we ended up crying together and hugging each other and comforting each other. And for me, it was the most important lesson. I learned that there is hope if we remain human and react as human reacts to tragedy, by helping and comforting each other, by talking and listening and trying to understand. I'm now working at a public school in Copenhagen where I teach one of the international classes. And there are 4 Ukrainian children in the class, and one of them is only 6. She never went to school in Ukraine, and she was extremely nervous the first day. She was holding on to her mom and wouldn't let her go, and she was crying, and she was very uncomfortable. And then I came to her and I spoke to her in Russian, and I assured both the mom and the girl that we will do everything in our power to make this day a good day for her. And I think that the family understood immediately I was from Russia because I couldn't speak Ukrainian, I spoke Russian to them. But at this point, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter at that moment because they were just happy that there was someone that was able to help and there was someone they could talk to without using Google Translate. And never ever have we talked about war directly, but nevertheless, there have never been any doubt about which side I'm on. And as long as such human contacts are possible, I think that there is hope for our nations. Thank you.
Oksana, you mentioned when you said in your introductory, answering my question in introductory part, you mentioned the youth, and that the youth is the hope, this is the future. The youth is in Ukraine, is this, and you yourself as a young woman, there will be those people who will be rebuilding Ukraine, to building a new country, even better than it was, although it was already sufficient and good by itself. You also work with the youth. You professionally worked before from Kiev and now in Copenhagen. Can you tell me what was the biggest long-term and short-term effect of the war on the youth?
Well, we are still analyzing it, and yes, me as a representative of Ukrainian-Danish Youth House, we are as a platform for the youth, building bridges among Ukrainian youth and Danish youth. So actually I'm grateful to have a chance today to be Ukrainian representative and to share my message with you here. One of the priorities, of course, was any educational opportunity for both to learn, and especially with the war ongoing now, the question of education is like also at a stake for quality education, because we do not realize probably that much unless it's like peaceful times how privileged we are to read the books, to have access and to spend time with our classmates or in the universities to get the quality education. And now on the target, of course, with the war, it's hundreds of institutions, high institutions, universities, kindergartens, youth centers are damaged. And those people in their, like, let's say, secure places where you get joy, you enjoy your youth on full, and you have the place for creativity and for engaging with others, it doesn't exist anymore. Even this, and afterwards, also education. I mean, online or being in the bomb shelter, you cannot get your homework done, you cannot read. Yeah, it's like education, you know, and whom you can become tomorrow, not, you know, perceiving and not getting really a right access to it. So us as a youth house, of course, the priority was supporting before the war different kind of initiatives, you know, it's like from entrepreneurship, but also to youth exchange for a dialogue, and now for us it became to even more important, because based on the different surveys of the youth, actually, are we there? Is it the time to do something? And of course, almost 100% answer was from the all IDPs, internally displaced youth, who were able to answer like to our survey. It was yes, we want anything to be there except of a war, to, you know, to switch the focus to it and to start dreaming again and to think about the things at least as much as it's possible to be done nowadays. So we are still conducting the projects which, you know, a broad audience can take part in. And now, of course, the main focus is my generation. It's a huge potential for the country. And of course, it's probably the most important is that this potential of my country, one day, whenever it's like a peaceful time come, can be back. You know, because of course it's a choice, where do we want to go, and of course based on hundreds of obstacles. But of course we would love for them, you know, to whichever they receive now, to make a contribution. And one good thing definitely with the war which occurred is the unity of, and this strong power, you know, of that we are like one piece, that we are the country, and it's definitely unbreakable, no matter what it comes. Yeah, so for the youth, it's, and in this unity and with a willing to be helpful and to be there in the right moment with whichever skill you have, whichever, because also the most important what we can share is our time. And there are people, they are so united to share time, skills, and everything. So we try as a youth house also to support it as much and as strong as we can.
I'm amazed how much you say about hope and loss in one small speech, because I don't know if you paid attention to what she said. She said the most important thing for Ukrainian youth right now is to start dreaming again. Can you think of a young person that has to start to learn to be dreaming again? And then she speaks about hope. And this is a wonderful combination when we talk about the youth, because it is the hope. And in this respect, thank you very much for your comment. I think it's very important. We gradually sliding down to the end of our discussion here, panel. I would have still more questions to the panelists, but please, I encourage you to think of your questions. But I would like to ask you, that's very important that the voice of Ukraine is heard right now. And this is a wonderful platform, this festival, where you can actually speak about things and speak openly. And I would like to ask Oksana, what can be your message? What can be your message to the people?
As you have seen, we are facing a very new type of war. We have been accused of having a very digital one, when all of the details, they are fully covered in the social media, on the mass media. And you know what I'm seeing, what I'm witnessing now is that actually everything, like all the videos and photos from massacres in Bucha, from killings in Mariupol, from terrible bombing in my beloved Kharkiv, it turns into the combination of the visual materials. You just want to scroll, you want to go out, you want to leave behind, and this is a normal reaction of any kind of human being. What is the message? The message is that we do need help. I mean, Ukraine still needs help. The war is not over. Now I'm standing here safe and sound, and like a couple of 1,000 kilometers from here, people are getting killed. So we do need the military support, we do need the humanitarian support, but moreover, we do need the understanding that we are standing on the edge of something really, really terrible. I mean, maybe tomorrow, like a very happy and peaceful, relatively peaceful world could actually hear the news of some nuclear explosions in Zaporizhia power plant, and this is not a joke anymore. This is the thing that we are about to face. That's why my message to the entire civilized world is, don't leave us alone, just stand with us, help us, and first of all, I would like to thank everybody. I would like to thank Denmark, which has provided me, my family, my small child, my husband, who is actually not Ukrainian, with all of the support, with all of the help we needed. At the time, we were just lost, you know, because we've lost ourselves first of all. Like, I'm not speaking about property, it doesn't matter anymore. That's why we are here to use each and every channel, because we are not only fighting the territory, local Ukrainian war. This is the global one because it concerns everybody. There are a lot of threats which are global, really global. And now our territory defense, they are fighting for our lands. Our army, they are standing for the democracy in the entire Europe. And we are facing the very bad thing, and this thing is the propaganda of the predatory Russian regime, and we should stand against it. And that's why each and every channel should be used to raise the awareness of what is really happening in Ukraine. This is not a fiction film. This is not a kind of, again, visual materials you have to scroll over. This is the local tragedy, the personal tragedy, and the global one, because we are losing people, we are losing the international communication, and we are losing maybe the hope for the entire decades to have the healthy dialogue within Europe. And this is not only the task of Ukrainians to stop the war where it is. This is the task of all the world in the 21st century to make it stop where it is now, to prevent people from killing. And then we are going to have a dialogue, then we are going to have many good things, and we really hope, we know it will happen, but for now, we have to use entire channels of communication to somehow get the aware Russians involved in this type of spreading the right information, and in the end, the war should start. And like me traveling for 5 hours today, and for 14 days being in the road with a small child at the end of March, was to somehow get heard, to get helped, and to raise the awareness of what is going on. And I'm really thankful that today our audience is here, and like we all have the possibility to express our message. Thank you. I think it was too long.
And that's the reason why we're here. This is the personal stories. These are the people who speak about their lives, the women who speak about their experiences. This is what Oksana was talking about when she said that this is not just materials in the internet or pictures that you can scroll down. You cannot scroll down from these words. You cannot scroll down from these stories. This is when another Oksana talks about the youth who actually learn to dream again. This is about Irina, who talks about her personal story. So maybe not that Russia is whatever is just Russian aggression. Maybe it's bigger, and maybe there are also people there. This is Henriette, who is actually a Danish woman. And one would think, how is a Danish woman affected by war? But she is. And these are personal stories where you can actually get the understanding. But now I would like to encourage you to ask questions. We have about 5-7 minutes to the Q&A session. So please raise your hand. Yes, please. Mikael. Do we have a mic? I'll come over. I will try to use my mic for that. Hello. Yes.
Thank you. Is it not a war between democracy and dictatorship? Because all those stories, I'm sorry, it's not offensive to you personally, but if we read the books from the history, Germans, most of Europeans can tell this story way back in history. That's the way dictators always do. But why can't we, as Democrats, find a way with the cooperation? And it's bothering me. In 1981, I saw the Russian play ice hockey, where the best players were promised to get to Canada, to NHL, if they could. But when we stood there and they left the field, they saw no one in the ice. And I read some book from the players. They escaped, and now one of them is sitting like a chairman for the ice hockey team company in Russia.
Can you formulate the question to the question?
That's how can we, some democracy, fight against dictatorship? So those stories you stay here in person and tell, they wipe out of the history of humankind.
Thank you so much for your question.
Can you repeat just shortly the question? It was not easy to hear from here?
It was almost impossible to, like,
Just
I'm afraid
short
I
version
haven't
of the
understood
question.
in the right way.
I think it was something with can democracy fight dictatorship, right? Yeah. That was the essence of...
I can say it so. Have we any means in democracy
To fight the dictatorship.
out in order develop wisdom with the single individual. And how do we fight dictatorship? It's come up each time. I have hope as a 73-year-old. I never should see a war in Europe. And that's beside your personal offer. But how most of Russian and Ukraine have known this system for a very, very long, more generations. But we live in a, what do I call it, a nice living, and we don't think daily about this. We have to come together with democracy against dictatorship.
Yes. I think, Henriette, I will address it to you because this is a combination of how we can, on this part of the world in the Nordics, address this and fight the war using the democracy that we have, that we built, the democratic power.
Okay, so did I understand, it was completely impossible to hear from here, so what if I understand correctly, is it, can we use democracy to fight dictatorship?
Let's go there.
Well, clearly not. At this point, we didn't succeed, so to speak. I think what is important that this is going on so many different levels. Some levels are politics, right? That's out of my field. I think it's very clearly we didn't manage to solve anything on that level. Us meaning the West and Russia, basically, because Ukraine sort of ended up. Also, I know it's an aggression towards Ukraine on Ukraine in itself also, but it's also an aggression towards the Western world at the same time, to some extent. So we didn't manage to stop dictatorship there. You can ask ourselves, did we do enough to try to start movements inside of the Russian society, because they are there. There are a lot of people who would like to see a non-dictatorship state, for sure. Did we not manage to work efficiently enough with these movements? I think it's a very difficult question to answer. It's, you know, you have to look at the Russian history also. There has been so many breakups in the Russian history. It's only 30 years ago that the Soviet Union collapsed, 31 years ago that the Soviet Union collapsed. They have never sort of had, I think, internally in Russia, had that look back what actually happened. They have never recently even had a proper look at Stalin as a bad guy. You know, it sort of disappeared into, yeah, but we won the Second World War. So there are a lot of elements into this. But I think democracies, how many years did it take to build democracy in some of the European countries? It doesn't come within 30 years. Maybe we were also a bit too optimistic because we have democracy, so other countries should also be able to develop democracy. But it might take longer than 30 years. I think definitely it can be a possibility for Russia, and I think it will happen. It will not happen tomorrow or next decade or so, but I think there's a possibility. As long as we keep on also working on a political level, of course, but also on the more soft power level. So we have this interconnection between civil society groups, because it has to come from inside. We cannot export it onto Russia from above. It has to come from the inside, as we normally do with when we try to develop democracy in other countries.
And thank you so much, Henriette. That was a very well-grounded answer. I think we shall take 2 questions because we're really out of time. That's one question, and if you can be precise with the question.
Yeah. Thank you so much. My name is Mads Christoffersen from the National Council of Churches in Denmark. Yesterday we had a prayer in Copenhagen with hundreds of mainly Ukrainians. What an honor, thank you. So my question would be, from your perspective, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and personal stories, what role do you see the church can play or is playing in Ukraine, also as a moral support to you and the civil society and so on and so forth, but maybe also in the support of the other forces? I don't know. Do you see any role of the churches in the ongoing
You
war?
mean specifically Ukraine?
In Ukraine.
Can I ask Oksana you this question? Just try to be short in several sentences.
Yeah, just can we clarify it? Because, well, I'm too emotional now. I might go in the wrong direction. Once again, What was like the
The
key
role
point?
of the church in Ukraine supporting the community, supporting the individuals. Just very briefly, if it's
Okay,
possible.
very briefly. Now we are also facing the crisis within the church system itself, because we have like the part which is more closer to Moscow hierarchy and so on, and the other one which is for Ukraine. As for the first one I've mentioned, it has lost a lot of positions, and now even the priests and many, like all this stuff, they're trying to transfer in another direction right now. As for church, like an institution, I would tell that it has a significant role right now in supporting people, because our people, the majority of them are Christians, they're religious, but from the other sides, as far as the war is still there, of course, the main like support we are hoping for is the like military one, but it's also impossible without the support from church, and it's being done. Like in the first couple of months, it's like the Ukrainian church has moved a couple of steps back. It was not seen much in the mass media and so on, but now it's gaining the previous positions in the society, and yes, it does have the role like in regulating the situation.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Oksana.
I'm
not sure my microphone is working.
An addition?
I just have a small add-on to this. On the legislation level, even since a year now, we officially do have even the position of a military chaplain. And, you know, if you're following the news and everything, you're like staying updated. One of the interviews of the paramedic, Yulia Parayevska-Tyra, when she was sharing, because she was captured, she was imprisoned, and what did she say? That the last thing and the most important among those who are in the front line, in the most dangerous places, they address to God. Even those who didn't believe, what you have inside and the hope for you to survive and to keep your life, you're actually addressing to, you know, to religion. So it does has very strong moral support, even judging on all the ex-colleagues, friends who are now, you know, on the front line.
Thank you so much. We'll take a question. John, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. My question is about how do we keep Ukraine high on the agenda? Yesterday it was high up in the Danish media because of the Independence Day in Ukraine, and it was half a year ago since it all started. But just a few days ago, a friend said to me, well, it's typical media coverage. After some months you forget all about it. I'm a journalist, so I know how it works. You cannot have Ukraine on the front page every single day. Of course you cannot. But can we do other things in the Nordic societies to keep it high on the agenda?
I guess it's to Ukrainian girls. Oksana, please.
We are talking about different kinds of audiences, and we are talking about different angles of the news coverage. Maybe, like, I'm not telling that everything is done in the traditional way, but in, like, today, we are having an event concerning, like, women affected. We also have scholars affected by the war. We also have some minorities, I mean, in the means of religion, in the means of like maybe social position and so on, who also are affected by the war in the different way. You know, like, as I've told, like, only showing pictures, it's only, you know, the coverage of the facts. We should understand, like, people should understand what is behind the scene, what is behind this stage. That's why I think, like, as a, maybe it's too loud to say it like that, but as a researcher in political science, I'm sure that new angles should be found to cover the information. Unless, like, if it doesn't happen, we will finish up, like, as only the visual materials.
Thank you so much, Oksana. I'm going to be fired by my boss here, who is sharing microphone with everyone, but at the risk of that, I still would like to get some questions. So please formulate your question.
Yes, I know you haven't been here for so long, but I have a fear that the intelligentsia will disappear from Ukraine. I mean, it's the cleverest people who get out of Ukraine, and some of you will be used to life in Denmark. I don't know how long this is going to last, but some might find a boyfriend here, or of course you who have a family back in Ukraine, you have another
Question.
To it, yes. But I'm afraid that the development stops in Ukraine. Do you think it does?
I think it quite resonates with the question which John just asked in the different formulation. But maybe Oksana, you can answer this.
If you don't mind, please, to repeat.
Are you afraid that all the brains of Ukraine will leave and it will sort of stop the development of Ukraine afterwards?
Yeah, actually, this was my worry and my point previously. And myself, my moral obligation is to do everything to inspire this youth to be back to Ukraine, because it was a wonderful country in terms of all different directions, and especially we learned, and we never had, let's say, democracy for granted. We learned a lot since 2014. And my generation, we were after 2 revolutions and 1 war. And here is at the core is our identity, and love to the country is that strong that I cannot say for 100%, no way, but at least if 45-50% could be back and they are willing to, according to the surveys, yeah, I think it will be absolutely different and stronger country to invest also in terms for business, for the youth, for the career, because it's a country of sources. And like for ages and for centuries, people knew it. And as Ukrainians, we also aware of it. We have everything, for a great life to enjoy. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Oksana, and thank you very much for the questions. I have to exercise my power of time holder right now and to close the discussion. This has been very interesting, I hope, also for you, and thought-provoking discussion. It's been difficult, first and foremost, for my guests here. And how can it not be? If the war in Ukraine is still going on, people are still dying, losing their homes, their lives, their identity. And we are actually still to understand what it means for all of us. But I'm sure, as what I'm started and opened this discussion with, that we can find the answers to this question only if we look for these answers together. I would like to thank you, my panel, my smart, most beautiful, and the most important thing, bravest women in war, and give them most highest applause. Thank you very much.